Coming up next, Miss Lelia Lewis, Building a Better You, right here on To God Be the Glory radio broadcast.
Hi, I'm Lelia Lewis. Welcome to another edition of Building a Better You. Now today we're going to be reading from the book of Daniel. And I chose that because my topic is going to be unshakable faith. And as we read about Daniel and his friends, we're going to see how they had unshakable faith in times of trial. And the same thing that they did back then, we can use today. And unshakable faith means you've got to trust and believe in God and what He says, what He does, and know that everything He tells you He will do for us, He will. But you got to have unshakable faith, not wavering. You can't be, oh, I believe, I trust in Him today, but then not believe and trust in Him 2 days from now. Maybe things aren't going your way. So let's go forward, and we're going to start in chapter 1. And I'm going to give you a little insight on what this is actually about. Because Daniel, and you remember him because they always talk about Daniel in the lion's den. And his 3 friends were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what do we remember them from? The fiery furnace. But everything we're going to talk about today happened way before those days. Because this happened when Daniel and his friends were much younger. And they were of the nation of Judah. But what happened was King Nebuchadnezzar, he was the king of Babylon. And he took over the land of Judah. So that meant that Daniel and his friends are now under the rule of a whole new king. So now King Nebuchadnezzar, he gave one of his masters an order to find all the children of quality. Now he had him do that for a purpose. And his name was Ashpenaz. Now he was the master in Babylon who the king appointed for him to go through all the children that are now under his jurisdiction, because he wanted all the so-called upper echelon children. So I'm going to start in chapter 1, and I'm going to go to verse 4, and we're going to read a couple of verses, and we're going to see exactly what type of children King Nebuchadnezzar was looking for and why. So let's go to verse 4. Children, he was looking for children in whom there was no blemish. That means they were perfect, but were well favored. They looked good. They were smart, skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, understanding science. So he wanted any kid, any child that was of the former king's family, of the prince, any prince that had children, any princess that had children. He wanted all the upper echelon children because he knew whether they were the ones that would be well educated, like he said, cunning in knowledge and understanding science, because they had great education. And so he wanted these particular children because it says he wanted them to have the ability to stand in his palace. Because his reason was because he wanted them to teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So he wanted all the upper echelon children that are now under his jurisdiction He wanted all the smart ones, all the good-looking ones, all the knowledgeable, quick children, because he wanted to train them in the Babylonian language, which meant to teach the learning and the tongue, the language of the Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans were the wise men of Babylon. So he wanted all the smart kids to be able to teach this to the others. So now what happened was, once that Daniel and his friends, of course, they were of the upper echelon, so they were chosen. But at the same time, their names were changed. Because once they were under Babylonian rule, the master changed Daniel's name to Belshazzar. And he changed Hananiah's name to Shadrach. And he changed Michael's name to Meshach. And he changed Azariah's name to Abednego. And those are the names that we're familiar with, because they were changed from their Jewish names to Babylonian names. Now, let's go forward. Verse 5 says, the king appointed them daily provisions of the king's meat, his own meat, and the wine which he himself drank. And he wanted to do this to get them strong and healthy, and he wanted to do it for 3 years. And he felt that once they were nourished and fed by him and his food and his drink, that they would be able to stand before him. Now, although the king had already determined what they were supposed to eat and what they were supposed to drink, Daniel, he couldn't do it, because he felt within his heart that he could not eat this meat or drink this wine, because they were of Jewish descent. So what he did, he said, well, I can't do this because this will defile me. So what he did, he asked the overseer. He asked the overseer if he would substitute the meat for what he called pulse, and the drink for just water for him and his 3 friends. Now, pulse is seeds. It's seeds from peas and beans and lentils. So Daniel wanted, I'll say, a vegetarian type thing, and just plain water. But then the guard was kind of nervous about that. Let's look at verse 9, and it says here, it says, the king, the prince who was overseeing him, he said, I fear, he's talking to Daniel now, when Daniel asked him, could he make the switch? He said, but I fear the Lord King. He has appointed you meat and drink. And he said, for why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? And that meant he was asking Daniel, well, what happens if I switch this and you don't eat what the king said eat? And then when he looks at you, he's going to think, well, maybe you don't look as healthy or as nourished as he thought you should, and then he's going to have my head. So Daniel said to him, he said, well, how about this? And he went, let's go to verse 12. Daniel said, I beseech thee 10 days. He's asking the guard for 10 days. You give us the pulse to eat and the water to drink for 10 days. Then let our countenance be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat the portion of the king's meat, and then see what their servant will do. So he said, well, just give me 10 days. You feed us pulse and water, feed them the king's food, and then at the end of 10 days, we'll go before the king, and then he could see the difference and make his choice. Okay, so he agreed. He agreed to do that, because when Daniel said they could see the countenance upon us, and the countenance means he'll be able to see our demeanor. He'll be able to see how we look. So at the end of the 10 days, their countenance, their demeanor, their look appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children that ate the king's meat. So now it looks like, oh, that pulse and that water does make a difference. Because Daniel and his three friends, they looked way much healthier, and they looked stronger, and they had gained weight. So this being the situation, then Melzar, that was the guard, he took away the meat and the wine from the other children, and they started feeding them the pulse and the water. And at the end of the 10 days, they were brought before the king. And as for, look at verse 17, it says, as for these four children, and that's Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God had given them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And then Daniel had the understanding in all visions and dreams. So now, let's go to verse 19. Now it says, now they're before the king, and he's communing with them. He's having conversation with them. And among all them, none was found like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And therefore they stood before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, that means no matter what he asked them, no matter what they talked about, he found them to be 10 times better than all his magicians and his astrologers in his whole realm. So they were better than the magicians, the astrologers, anybody that the king had in his whole kingdom. Nobody could supersede them. And that was where their faith came in from day one. Even though they were captives, Daniel would never, ever deceive himself, his faith, be determined, or, let somebody persuade him. He didn't want to be persuaded or dissuaded from his belief in his God. He wouldn't eat what the king had set before them because it would defile him. That was the faith that he had in God, because he knew God was with him, and he knew God gave him favor with the guard, that the guard would even agree to do that. That is unshakable faith. Now let's go forward to chapter 2. Now chapter 2 is under the heading of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now all this took place in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And he started having dreams, and this one particular dream, it kept reoccurring and reoccurring, and he couldn't tell what it meant. He was becoming very troubled about it. So let's go to verse 2 in chapter 2. And the king commanded to call all the magicians and his astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, which are the wise men, for them to show him his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. And then the Chaldeans spoke and said, O king, live forever. Tell us your dream, and we'll show you the interpretation of your dream. But look what it says in verse 5. It says, but the king answered and said unto them, the thing is gone from me. Well, if it's gone from him, that means he forgot what it was. He forgot the dream. And he says, if you will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be turned into dunghill. So now the king's annoyed because they can't tell what the dream was if he can't tell them the dream, and he's telling them, you're the sorcerer, you're the magician, bring it back to me. Bring it back to my mind, and then tell me what it is, and then tell me what it means. And if you can't do that, then I'll just cut you to pieces and turn your houses into a dunghill. And that means destroy your house and make it fertilizer. So that's how that went. So then, what goes on after that, let's go to verse 10. And this is where the Chaldeans, they're still trying to make him understand. Verse 10, the Chaldeans answered and they said, there is not a man upon the earth that can show the king's matter. That means there's nobody here that can read your mind. Nobody can show what's on your mind. And therefore, there is no king, no lord, no ruler that asks such a thing of any magician or any astrologer or any Chaldean. And it's a rare thing that the king even requires that. And there is none other that can show it before the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not in flesh. And for this reason, the king was very angry and very furious. Now he's having all wise men in Babylon be destroyed. Because they told him, only the gods can do this. And our gods are not of flesh. Because they worshipped idols. So they're trying to make him understand they can't bring a dream back to your mind. So he just wanted them all slain. Now Daniel and his 3 friends, they were among the wise men. They were the Chaldeans. They were part of that. So what happened after that? Daniel, he went to Arioch. Now Arioch is the captain of the king's guard. And he asked him, why is he rushing to do this decree and have everybody killed, all the wise men killed? And Arioch told him, he said, because nobody could tell the king his dream. So Daniel says, well, let me talk to him. So Daniel goes to the king and he asks if he would give him some time. Give me some time. And if you give me time, I'll show you the dream and tell you what it means. So the king agreed. Now let's go to verse 18. Verse 18 says, when Daniel went home, he told his friends what he had done. He said, I went to the king and I told him, well, if he gives me some time, I can tell him his dream and tell him what it means. But here's what I need you to do. And this is what he told his friends to do. Verse 18, he says, I want that you would desire mercies of God of heaven concerning this secret. And the secret was the dream. So what he's telling them is, I need you to pray to God to save us, to give us the secret, and that he and his fellows, meaning those, should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then, that same night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in the night vision. And Daniel blessed God of heaven. And Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he went on to say in verse 22, for he revealeth the deep and the secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth in him. I thank thee and I praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who has given me wisdom and might, and has made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. And after the next day, when Daniel awakened from his night dream, he went to Arioch, and that was the captain of the guard. And he said, don't destroy any of the wise men. Don't destroy the Chaldeans. He said, I have found the answer. Just take me before the king, and then I can show him his interpretation. And he did. He took him before the king. He took him before the king. And the king said, art thou able to make known my dream. Now let's go see what Daniel said about the dream. Now we're going to go to verse 27 and see what Daniel's answer was. Now, verse 27 says, Daniel answered in the presence of the king, and they said, first of all, the secret which you have demanded can't come from the wise men, can't come from the astrologers, it can't come from the magicians, it can't come from the soothsayers. They can't show it to you. But, verse 28, he said, there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the vision of thy head upon thy bed is this. Now, he was telling him that what he saw was the future of what was to come. And he's telling him that in his dream he saw a great image, but the image was a horrible form. A horrible form. Now let's go to verse 32, and he's going to tell him exactly what the form was. Verse 32 says, the image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms were of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs were of iron, and his feet were part iron and part clay. And then you saw a stone was cut without hands, and that stone smote, and smote means to struck. It struck the image upon the feet that were made of iron and clay, and it broke them into pieces. And then the rest of the statue, the rest of the image, which was made of brass and silver and gold and all that, they broke it into a pile, so to speak, because all those pieces were together in a pile. All those were broken in a pile. And it says, like a chaff of a summer threshing floor. And that means like when you're threshing the wheat, as the particles just fly all over the floor, and the wind carried the pieces away, that no place was they were found, no place. So it's just like a wind came in and blew them all away. And that same stone that hit the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And that was the dream. That was the dream. Now let's see what the interpretation of the dream is. It says, verse 44, says, and in the days the kings shall of the God of heaven set up another kingdom. Now he told him that he was going to be the king, because the gold head was him being the king. But after him there would be 3 more kingdoms. But after those 3 kingdoms, while they were still around, in those days shall the God of heaven set up one kingdom, and it shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to anyone, and it shall break all these kingdoms into pieces, and the one kingdom shall stand forever. So now that Nebuchadnezzar knew what had happened, he fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel. And the king answered and said unto Daniel, O of truth it is that your God is a God of gods, a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing that you could reveal this secret. And after that, Daniel became king. The king made him a ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and over the chief governors of all the wise men. And his friends, they were overseers of the affairs of the province of Babylon. And Daniel sat in the gate of the king. And all that was because what? He had faith in God. He trusted God. They prayed. They asked for God's mercy. They asked for God's endurance. They asked for God's blessing and his guidance. That is unshakable faith. Now, what kind of faith do you have? Is your faith that strong? He went from a captive and then became a ruler over the province of the same area that he was captive under 3 years prior. Why? Because he trusted God. He believed in God. He knew that God would never leave him or forsake him. All you have to do is trust and believe in the Lord. And now I'd like to share the poem with you. And this one is called The Presence of Jesus. If Jesus was to come back, what a visit that would be, to see his face, to talk with him, to know he cares for me. Would I dare to ask him questions, or would I just sit there and smile? It would really be so awesome being in his presence a while. I could tell him all that's on my mind, share all my woes and cares, but I'd rather just sit and glorify him and be thankful that he's there. To have him in your corner when a brawl is about to begin, he always stretches out his hand to pick you up again. Be grateful that you have him. Forever praise his name. And know that life without him would never be the same. Never be the same. Daniel knew that, and that's what he did. And as I said in the 4th verse, I said, well, if you're ever in a brawl, like in a rink or something, a boxing ring, he's always in your corner. He's the one that will pick you up, dust you off, and stand you up again. Be grateful that you have him. Daniel and his friends were grateful. All he asked them to do was pray. Pray for God's mercy, pray for God's strength, and to help reveal to them the secret. They knew that God would never fail them. They knew that they could count on God no matter what the situation was. Now, you need to do the same thing. We can use that same method no matter what your trial is. Just know that God is there with you. Know that you can count on him. Know that he will be there for you. Know that he will guide you. I'm going to ask you now, where does your faith lie? Who do you put your faith in? Do you put it in man, or do you put it in God? God can give you stuff that nobody else can. He's there when nobody else is. No matter what people say, no matter how they treat you, they walk away. When times get hard, they're not there to support you. When times get hard, God is there to support, to give us the strength we need, to give us the guidance, and to show us how to go forward. And that's what we need in our everyday life. So continue to read his word, to study his word, and most of all, to do his word. And my closing words for today are, God answers prayers. Don't ask others for what only God can give. And until next week, I'm Lelia Lewis. Thanks for joining me.
You've been listening to Building a Better You, right here on To God Be the Glory radio broadcast.
my daughter out of North Carolina, and Miss Darlene Thomas. Darlise.
Lise.
Darlise.
Lise.
L-I. Oh, Lisa. Oh.
Darlise.
Okay, well, thanks anyway for listening. See you next week.